we're here with Phil Kornbluth, an expert in the helium resources, helium market, the helium business, longtime player in the helium business. Phil, if you could just take a few minutes and tell us about yourself before we get started.
Sure. Daniel, I've been in the helium business now since 1983. So that's most of my career. It's 37 plus years. And I'm a commercial guy. I've had pretty much every commercial role in the helium business over the years. I worked at BOC for 25 years. I ran their global helium business for a number of years. I had a very similar role at Matheson Gas until about 2013. And in recent years, for the last 5 years, I've been a full-time consultant on anything commercial that has to do with the helium business. So, that's what I do full-time. I've been fortunate that there's not that many helium consultants out there, so you can still make a living with a relatively small niche.
Oh, thank you. So, regarding helium, it seems that in recent years, we've seen some helium shortages, and this most recent helium shortage. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and maybe how it occurred, and what you see moving forward?
Sure. We've had the most recent helium shortage, which the industry creatively called Helium Shortage 3.0. Started in February 2018. And I believe it came to an end in February 2020. So it was been a 2-year shortage. I usually mark the beginning of the shortage as a time when some of the helium majors began to allocate supply to their customers. And basically allocating means rationing. And for that 2-year period, continuously, at least a couple of the helium majors were rationing supply. And really, at one time or another, almost all of the helium majors were rationing. I marked the end of the shortage when the Bureau of Land Management had also been allocating its crude helium supply coming out of the federal stockpile for more than 2 years. And on March 26th, they stopped allocating supply to the helium refiners. So that was an indication that the shortage was over. And, frankly, there'd still be a shortage right now if COVID didn't come along. But COVID took about, I would say, at least 20%, maybe 25% of helium demand, and reduced demand like somebody flipped a light switch. And, pretty much overnight, we went from a shortage that was probably a 10%-ish type shortage to what is now probably a modest excess of supply. So I think the shortage is probably over for this cycle. I mean, if the world economy and helium demand recover more rapidly than most people think they will, we could get back into a tight supply situation. But if it takes a year or longer for things to get back to normal, which is kind of the prevailing view, I think that we will have new supplies, new sources coming into the market before demand recovers, and I don't think we're going to experience any more shortage in 2020 or 2021.
Do you see the reduction in demand being tied to a particular market or market sector for helium?
Well, I would say there have been a couple of areas that have been hit particularly badly, but it's been pretty much an across-the-board thing. I mean, when at the beginning, the social distancing, shut off the party balloon sector initially, but then my understanding is that the party balloon sector's come back pretty nicely. I've heard that graduation season was quite good, and I guess there have been a lot of things you couldn't do to celebrate graduations. One of the things you could do was still go to the grocery store and buy some balloons and put them on your mailbox or whatever it is. So that application seems like it's come back. Another application that's doing that was hurt pretty badly was the offshore diving and offshore industry in general. Low, and that was COVID related. I mean, oil prices went down to almost nothing, and they've since recovered quite a bit, but they're still very low. And a lot of the oil service work was postponed or stopped. So that that's an area where demand is very weak, and it will remain weak until oil prices rebound. But it's been pretty much an across the board thing. I mean, manufacturing industry was was shut down across the board, and folks who used helium needed less. So yeah, I don't know that there have been many applications that weren't impacted.
What about regionally? Have there been some particular different regions in the world that have you seen lower demand?
Yeah, but it's really like at the beginning it was a Chinese thing. At the beginning it was also not just about demand, but the logistics going in and out of China were all screwed up, and sailings were being, cargo ships were being canceled and things like that. So there was a lot of very messy logistics at the beginning. When Italy got hit, northern Italy, the suppliers in Italy told me that their helium demand was down 70%. So I would say it's followed the hot spots. As you've had a COVID hotspot, things shut down. Helium demand was down. So yeah.
Now, you mentioned some new sources for helium, being developed. Can you tell us about those?
Sure. Well, this year there has supposed to be some new supply from an expansion of the one of the helium plants in Algeria, a place called Arzew. I'm not sure how much of an impact that expansion is going to have, mainly because demand for LNG is also down. So there may not be enough feed gas or as much feed gas as was anticipated to really get the benefit of that expansion. There's also a third plant in Qatar, creatively called Qatar 3. We're not the most creative marketers all the time in the industrial gas business, but the third plant in Qatar is supposed to start up in the fourth quarter of this year. That would bring in about a little over 400 million feet a year of new capacity against a 6 billion foot base capacity. So it's a pretty nice sized increment. And then the really big news, there's a very large project under development in Siberia by Gazprom. It's called the Amur project. And they will be bringing on 3 separate tranches of 700 million feet a year each, starting with the first tranche middle of next year, the second tranche in 2022, and the third tranche supposedly in 2024. If you add up those 3 tranches, that's like a third of world supply. So that's a very big new project. And if that project develops as expected, we really shouldn't be talking about shortages for quite a while. And there are other projects in the pipeline a little further out, but there's a smaller project in Russia, and there's potential for some expansions in Qatar. And then I should mention, since we are sitting here in the United States, or should I say North America, there's a lot of activity in the southwestern U.S. right now, and there's a lot of activity in Saskatchewan and Alberta, Canada, trying to develop non-hydrocarbon helium-bearing gas, gas that has fairly high helium concentrations. And while the scale of those projects is smaller, there's a lot of activity, and some of those projects are going to result in new supply closer to home.
What about the helium stockpile at the Bureau of Land Management? Do you see that being depleted anytime in the near future?
Well, the government is the government has around 2.5 BCF of crude helium still left in the stockpile, and private industry also has around 2.5 BCF stored in the same stockpile. So it's commingled, like money in a bank. And the BLM has plans to privatize their helium assets by probably 2023 or possibly 2024. They between now and when they privatize the assets, they're only reserving the 2.5 BCF for government users. So it's declining slowly, but compared to where it once was, it used to be over 30 BCF in the ground, which was a tremendous stockpile. It was probably 10 or 15 years worth of worldwide demand. So now it's 2.5 BCF, so it's less than a half a year's worldwide demand. So it's the BLM in general is a less important part of the world's helium supply than it once was, far less important. And by the time the assets are sold, it will be a relatively minor part of supply. It's it will still be there. It will just be operated privately, and that is a bit of a misconception because there are a lot of folks who think that the BLM is going to shut down, and it will continue to operate as to store and transport crude helium, probably for another 10 years, if not longer.
So we've heard a lot about a growing interest in recycling helium because of perhaps unreliable supply in the past. So has helium recycling made a significant impact on helium demand? And is there any application that you've seen having the biggest impact?
Yeah, it actually has, and the places where recycling has had the most impact. I would say MRI magnet manufacturing has all the big magnet manufacturing facilities have put in recycling capability, and some of those, they were some of the largest helium usage points in the world, and also optical fiber is another application where there's been a fair amount of recycling capability installed. I mean, it's the key to recycling. You need to be using a lot in a single place so that you can collect it economically and purify it if necessary. But also, it needs to be an application where the helium doesn't get contaminated too badly when it's used. So with MRI, you're cooling a magnet. As you cool the magnet, a lot of the liquid helium vaporizes. You collect it. It is only very mildly contaminated with air, and it's easy to recycle. Optical fiber, it's kind of similar. It only gets contaminated with air, so it's easy to clean up and recycle.
And I wanted to ask you about the smaller helium users in the scientific community, perhaps. Do you have any suggestions for how they might be able to mitigate some helium supply shortages, even if they're, short term?
Yeah, that's a tough question. But first of all, it's always good to have a contract, because if you don't have a contract for your supply, when there is a shortage, you're the first one out. The non-contract customers get shown the door. But assuming you have a contract, my advice is really just to be a good customer. Pay your bills, honor your commitments, build a rapport with your supplier, and hopefully your supplier will treat you well when there's a shortage. I mean, it's natural that a helium supplier, like any supplier, is going to want to take good care of their largest and best customers. So, there's a natural inclination for the little guy to get pushed aside a little bit. So I would just say, try to be your supplier's favorite customer. Don't be the worst haggler around. when you're negotiating price or whatever it is. But just be reliable. You be reliable, be a good customer, and hopefully you'll be treated well when times are when helium supply is tight.
Phil Kornbluth, I want to thank you for taking some time with us to enlighten us on the status of the helium market, and hopefully we can have another conversation at some point in the future.
Okay, Daniel, my pleasure. Thank you.